Mystery of BELICENA VILLCA. Fourth Book. Quest for Uncle Kurt. Chapter 35. What a city, Nif. In those days, it counted with more than 130,000 inhabitants, and a perimeter of more than 20 kilometers. To its towering walls reached roots of all Asia, of Mongolia, of Russia, of Turkestan, of the Dzungaria, of Afghanistan, of the India, etc. In addition to the mentioned Chanlam from the Lhasa, whereby arrived the chariots that transported us. Our path, since the dogs gave us, deposited us at the feet of the mountain range Nanan, followed the same natural route. Border the mountain range by one side, which now was prolonged in the Mount Mahache, and the river Xining by other. Over its right shore was located Xining Foot, at 2,500 meters high. The city of Xining was a gigantesque market, to which none civil war, neither the national war against Japan, had affected its febrile rhythm. The only alteration was constituted by the different troops that coexisted suspiciously, and that once in a while start some incident. Such troops belonged to other many unknown lords or triads and controlled each one of them, a sector of the city. There existed even nationalist and communist factions, apart from the aristocratic or noble, traditionalist, religious and of the mafia. However, Xining Foot was then a free area. It means that it had not fallen under the control of the Japanese. In front of an exterior attack, paradoxically, each troop would be occupied to defend their part of the wall and would forget all the differences to face a common enemy. The Kalika community of Xining Foot was really important. We verified it at entering to the neighborhood of the pale faces, called thus, for the skin color of the nabes, and admire the enormous sanctuary of Shiva that they possessed. They offered themselves to provide us all the necessary to initiate a new expedition to the Tibet. They were especially enthusiastic by the idea to undertake the annihilation of other Gempas, as the one of the Duskas. They remained disenchanted when we explained them that we had to return to Germany. If our race reaches to dominate the world one day, and remains loyal to the Hyperborean wisdom of the SS, there will be no place on the earth for the worshippers and servants of the potencies of the matter. The eternal SS will destroy them without mercy, and you, heroic Kalikas, will be beside us, wearing, perhaps, the ensign Totenkopf, the ensign of skull. I assured them, without suspecting that this last would become real before I thought it. In the face of our irrevocable decision, the Kalikas acceded to support the journey to the east. Briefly, they exposed us the situation. The two most powerful military forces of China were the nationalist of Chiang Kai-shek, and the communist of Mao Zedong. Before 1937, both armies fought fiercely, but now they faced together the Japanese enemy. As is natural, for anyone who comprehends the political structure of the Sinaki, the communists of Mao were catered by the Soviet Union, and to the nationalists of Chiang were succored by England and the United States, that is to say, the Anglo-Saxon imperialism. And fraternally united, as were the Sinaki and its foreign associates, the right and left wings were allied against the Japanese. Fascism. In a reduced scale, it was happening in the Chinese War, what would occur 4 years later in the Second World War. There was just one difference, that for the case, it didn't mean importance because the awakened man is guided by the facts, and not for names. It was the qualifying of nationalists that the members of the party at Chiang Kai-shek adopted to define themselves. Curiously, those nationalists were not supported by others, the National Socialists, but by the extreme liberalism of the Anglo-Saxon. And that is explained easily, because that is what Chiang and his followers were, exponents of the most reactionary liberal right wing of China, that's to say, the most sepoy. In this of being sepoy, follower of the colonialist potencies to the detriment of their own country, it must be admitted that Chiang Kai-shek was almost as great as the Mahatma Gandhi, that agent of the English Secret Service, who, gave the India to the exploitation of the masters of the Commonwealth, impeding that there be concentrated a real nationalist revolution. It means National Socialist. For this reason, to call Gyanga nationalist would be a joke, a tasteless joke, if it is not for the role that his chiefs of the Sinaki made him represent caused finally the fall of the millenary Chinese culture, in the miserable and austere Marxist-Leninist doctrine. No. Chiang was not nationalist, but outright sepoy. And who doubts of it? Just observe what he did with Formosa, the modern Taiwan, where there are none popular corporations, and the ethical codes that characterizes the nationalism, but the rapacious action of the multinational companies and the World Bank, and the unlimited exploitation of the Chinese people, completely outcasted to decide the destiny of their nation, because this has been already determined by the Sinaki. If a nation wants to the imperialist, the history offers two classical models, that not for being less understood by the observers, are less utilized in all the times. One is the Greco-Roman model, inherited from the ancient concept of the universal imperialism, of the Indo-Aryans. This model, and Rome, gave us one of the last examples, only demands that the other populations be submitted militarily, not culturally. Thus, the populations of different idiosyncrasy could be integrated to the Roman Empire, conserving their culture, language, and mores, and, if they were enough fierce to resist with pride the Pax Romana, they could obtain extraordinary concessions, as the citizenship of Gauls and Spaniards, and the control of the army, and from the empire everything, achieved by the Germans. That was possible, because in this model of empire the value was settled in the courage, real, of the populations. Was more valuable the bravest one. This principle had indubitable character and no one feared the imperial assent of a brave people, because it was obvious that such population resulted valuable for the empire. It means, in that first model, would not be necessary to practice the cultural indoctrination of the defeated ones, employ the brainwashing, destroy them morally, corrupt them, maintain them in their barbarity, or return them to the savagery. That was not convenient for anyone. It was against the judicial essence of the Aryan universal empire, that is to say, that it was against the honor. And here is the crux of the matter. The ethic support of the previous principle, the supreme principle which is fundamental stone of juridical social structure of the national state, the principle of the honor. The justice with which the empire will treat a conquered, or allied, population, from which will depend its existence and development, will only demand the guarantee of honor. For example, Alexander the Great, imperialist with honor, didn't need to dismember Egypt, neither to impose the Greek language to the Egyptians, nor annihilate them, nor submit them to the enslavement, nor destroy their pyramids, to accept them without prejudices as federated of the Macedonian Empire. And the Romans, saving the distances, when they submitted the Gauls, at last, who had resisted bloodily for centuries, proceed in the same honorable manner. And to such extreme they opened the doors of the empire, that in little time no one spoke of Gauls, any more but of Roman Gaul. The other model of empire is the Carthaginian, typically non-Aryan, inherited by the Phoenicians from their Semite ancestors of Assyria, Babylon and Sumer. It is convenient to comprehend this concept, because the English and North American had been adhered to the Carthaginian model, populations completely dazed by the systematic and indefatigable labor of the white fraternity. About the Carthaginians, BELICENA VILLCA has already spoken on her letter. Population of merchants and lacking of ethical principles, only skillful for the commerce and the piracy, famous for the human sacrifices that they offered to their incandescent iron idol. Carthaginian, English, Yankee. As their predecessors at the Assyrian Babylonian, they would think that the rest populations of the earth are an article of consumption for their insatiable appetite. Behold the equivalent principle to the value of the populations in the Greco-Roman model. For the Carthaginian, English and Yankee, the submitted populations have none value, on themselves, but in the measure that they be useful to the empire. Thus, the conquered, or dominated population results enslaved, humiliated, dehumanized, despoiled of their own value, transformed in a tool, in an utensil. It is valuable while is useful. Judaic principle of the value which is not casual to find in the summit of the Anglo-Saxon imperialism. If a colonial population is useful, then it must be exploited without limits. If they are profitable, then it must indoctrinated to give them utility. What represents an inversion of what will have to be protected and recovered with interests. If something is opposed to the exploitation, it must be neutralized. If it is not proceeded thus, they will justify themselves hypocritically. It would not be helping that population to recover its value, that is to say, its utility. The man has a price, as the goods. He is valuable for he does, and can be more valuable for what he is capable to do. The Carthaginian Anglo-Saxon Empire will be committed to extract the highest utilitarian value of the populations, conceding them the possibility to be very valuable, producing much. What is opposed to this magnanimous concession of those who are in the world's power will be destroyed, in favor of those who are submitted, but can demonstrate their value. In defense at the possibility to be useful for the imperialists, possibility that they denominate seriously democratic freedom. And what is opposed to the population that doesn't worth a fig, be valorized being useful to the empire, serving, producing, permitting that the empire seizes its riches, if it has, or saving to spend them in the own benefit if the empire needs them now or tomorrow? Is its own culture the obstacle? Well, it will be reculturized by all means necessary. Is the national consciousness the enemy? Well, it will be attacked the essence of the national being. It will be started to discredit or deny the own good and will be exalted the foreign good. Contrarily, the foreign good will be diminished. The own good will be exalted until the exaggeration. Then, the trust in the national destiny will collapse, and the people will believe overwhelmed that the cultural distance between the own national weakness and the foreign force and greatness is insurmountable. The second step will consist to attack specifically the supports of the national being, the territoriality, the national symbols, the traditions, etc. The frontiers will be displaced, or threatened to create the sensation that the nation is not finished, which is something half-constructed, that doesn't exist. It will slander the pro-men of the homeland, that good or bad contributed to its existence, to make that the population be ashamed of the past. They will be presented to the comparison, instead, to the contemporary imperialists of them, to make that the people repudiate their heroes, and admire gringos, and be lamented. What were we doing, while they were constructing their powerful empires? It is the racial unity the impediment. The people will be bastardized, favoring the immigration of inferior races. It is the national unity. It will be disintegrated bribing, or buying leaders, facing ones against each others, and creating chaos, the evidence that it treats about a population in which its members can't be agree within them. As you see, NIF, the Carthaginian model, demonstrates an entire modus operandi in the action of the imperialists. While in the Greco-Roman model, the most valuable is the bravest one, and the brave populations could grow and develop without problems, according to their own cultural guidelines. In the Carthaginian Anglo-Saxon model, it must be permanently applied the principle it is valuable while it's useful, what obeys to submit the defeated populations, or dominate them, by means of more vile practices. And, here we are right to also to the crux of the matter. The juridical support of the aforementioned principle, and of those that constitutes the Carthaginian Anglo-Saxon Empire, is the principle of the synarchic principles, the supreme principle which is fundamental stone of the juridic social structure of the synarchic state. The principle of the division. Division of what? Of everything, because the principle of division bestows to the emperor or king, Carthaginian, English or Yankee, the right to divide the structure of the populations. It must be compared immediately, to stand out the differences. The principle of honor of the Greco-Roman imperialists was essentially ethic, and it created the obligation to procure the common good, to valorize the value of the brave. On the contrary, the principal division of the Carthaginian Anglo-Saxon imperialists was fundamentally juridical and amoral, and they generated the right to divide to assure the value of those who are useful, to protect the democratic freedom to value being useful, producing, serving. Here are the fundamental differences between both models: the ethic, against the juridical and amoral; the moral obligation, to assure the common good, against the amoral right, to divide the common good to extract its utilitarian value. The Greco-Roman imperialism produced citizens of the empire, honorable, title that in no way undermined their nationality of racial pride. The Carthaginian Anglo-Saxon imperialism models citizens of the world, ambiguous and dishonorable, title that most of times occults the untold betrayal. To the citizens of the empire, we already know them by the history. It is of interest, whereas to know how are the citizens of the world, analogous title to the slave of the Synarchy? Well, it treats about beings that have been conformed. According to the Carthaginian Anglo-Saxon model, it means beings who have suffered all the modes of the principal division. They are habitually internationalists, because their nationality has been divided and disaggregated. They believe that the international saves the difference between populations. They are decided pacifists, because their psychic structure was divided Freudianally, and their warrior instinct qualified of primitive aggressive tendencies that are originated in the cortex, animal brain, and emerges through the unconscious. For the psychoanalytic culture, the warrior instinct is a disgraceful impulse, almost animal, extremely dangerous, because it can incarnate in the myth of the hero, and become dominant in the conscious. Who are indoctrinated thus, identify the war with savagery, and believe that the peace must be achieved at any cost, because, in the social state, it is possible to demonstrate the utility serving to the pacifist imperialism, world government, Synarchy, or whatever be named the system that exploits them. These exemplars are colorblind to the nationality, and their warrior instinct has been locked. Therefore they lack of heroism, of capacity of patriotic reaction. They are being psychologically mutilated that believe in the union of many concepts impossible to unify under a Carthaginian Anglo-Saxon imperialism. Peace, happiness, creation, progress, freedom, civilization of love, universal fraternity, and so forth. Naturally, in our age, they can be good communists or good liberals, indistinctly. But, a part of internationalists or pacifists, they can be collaborators of the Carthaginian imperial system, working from inside of their nations, or in those that don't believe, to favor the contribution of utilitarian value that the imperialists have assigned to their population or country. Or can be international agents of the imperialism, and consecrate themselves to execute their plans. Anyways, their tasks will consist, from inside or from outside, to divide, that is to say, to apply the principle of division. There was something united exists that is opposed to the Carthaginian Anglo-Saxon imperialism. Intrigue, the bribery, the corruption, the Machiavellianism, the indecence, the defamation, the publicity, the misinformation, etc. All the means and crimes will be valid to divide everyone, and fortify the parts that are useful and serve to the foreign imperialism. In the formation of lackeys of this kind, the Carthaginian Anglo-Saxon imperialism has always excelled. The classic type is the sepoy. Naturally, I am not referring to the Hindu sepoy, the concrete man, who many times with incredible courage tried to free himself from the English despoiler, but to the typo of the sepoy, to the class of man, valuable to its service, that the English wanted to fabricate dividing all his principles. In Carthage, existed thousands of mercenaries of this kind. In Asia, and in Africa, the English would fabricate them by hundreds of thousands. Thus, we arrived to Chiang Kai-shek, which was the classic type of sepoy, at the service of colonial potency Carthaginian Anglo-Saxon, and we realized that at defining the terms of such personage right can't have anything of nationalist, and much of imperialist agent. He, as Gandhi, in the India, Marcos in the Philippines, F. Duvall in Haiti, Reza Pahlavi in Iran, Tito in Yugoslavia, Fidel Castro in Cuba, and any uncountable tyrants of Asia, Africa and Latin America, were great sepoys, who systematically divided the real nationalist movements of their countries, and then, crushed them part by part. It is understood that nationalism is the worst enemy of the Carthaginian, Anglo-Saxon imperialism. Well, now, if I have demonstrated you that the supreme principle of the Carthaginian Anglo-Saxon imperialism is the principle of division, and I opposed it to the principle of honor that fundaments the Aryan universal imperialism, then it must be added that such principle of division is essentially non-Aryan, but is not only about a presumption of the fact that as Carthaginians as Phoenicians, Egyptians, Assyrians, Babylonians, etc. have employed it profoundly, because, in the Aryan realms, where the priestly hypocrisy has predominated for some period, the principle of division has been used as well, due to the priestly castes, and the synarchy also registers both common interests. The proof of their Aryan origin is, as could not be another way, in their biblical precedents. That's to say, the principle that gives the right to divide, although ancient and not Aryan, finds its juridical formulation in the population that worships a God of justice, one that puts the tablets of the law, and that population is Israel, the chosen people by Jehovah Satan. To present the principle of division, the doctors of the law express it through a metaphor in the first book of the Kings. From that figure will be extracted the principle, and it will be legally regulated, it will be converted in divine right of kings and emperors, and, modernly, in not declared right own of hierarchs of the Carthaginian Anglo-Saxon imperialism. Logically, for being a right, its sanction must be realized in the course of a judgment, and judgment in which the judge results unappeasable, in such manner that the exerted right becomes a supreme principle in first law. Such judge can only be the wisest man of the earth and history, and must also be a king, because the principle of division will bestow the right only to sovereigns of the Carthaginian model. The man who reunited these conditions was, of course, the King Solomon. And thy servant is in the midst of thy people which thou hast chosen, a great people, that cannot be numbered, nor counted for multitude. Give therefore thy servant an understanding heart to judge thy people, that I may discern between good and bad. For who is able to judge this thy so great a people? And the speech pleased the Lord, that Solomon had asked this thing. And God said unto him, Because thou hast asked this thing, and hast not asked for thyself long life, neither hast asked riches for thyself, nor hast asked the life of thine enemies, but hast asked for thyself understanding to discern judgment. Behold, I have done according to thy words. Lo, I have given thee a wise and an understanding heart, so that there was none like thee before thee, neither after thee shall any arise like unto thee. 1 Kings 3:7. The personage is already presented. He is wise for God's disposition, his judgment is unappeasable, and he is king. He must, then, exert the right to divide, to become into supreme principle, in first law. The opportunity is given by two Jewish whores, who discuss the maternity of a child. One of them substituted her dead son for the son of another. Then said the king, the one saith, This is my son that liveth, and thy son is the dead. And the other saith, Nay, but thy son is the dead, and my son is the living. And the king said, Bring me a sword. And they brought a sword before the king. And the king said, Divide the living child in two, and give half to the one, and half to the other. 1 Kings 3:23. This is the famous Solomonic judgment, which legalizes the right of the king to divide if that is useful. In this case, the utility is to know the truth that will valorize to the mother with her son re-establishing the service. It must be warned that the character of the priestly investiture has remained very clear. The king doesn't carry the sword, he requests it. He is a priest. Let's remember that the Bible is a sacred book, and that on it even the last apex has a meaning. We hear daily the evangelist preachers qualifying the Bible as the Word of God. But there are those who blindly believe that this is true. They are the Kabbalist rabbis, the same that, precisely, manage the Masonry, and tens of secret societies of Synagogue secrecy, organizations in which, casually, militate the men of the state, that led the Carthaginian, Anglo-Saxon imperialism. Thereby, it is a serious thing the principle that is derived from the biblical metaphor. What means, the rabbinic terms, those images? That the priest-king has the right to request the sword and divide, and that such fact is fair. Not only fair, but the fount of justice. The justice at the beginning of the judgment is not manifested, it is unknown really who is the mother. The justice made itself present a posteriori that the priest-king exerted the right to divide. In sum, the priest-king takes the sword, the power of the state, and exerts the right to divide the body of the child, a small population, and that is fair, produces the justice, the own fundament of the priest-king. Conclusion. The right of the king to divide the bases, justify the rupture and fortify the throne. With their usual realism, the rabbis' doctors have interpreted in this manner the Solomonic judgment, and have synthesized it in the Talmud, from where surely Machiavelli learnt it. The king must divide to reign. This non-Aryan principle, Judaic and amoral, has been constituted in the ruler axiom of the Carthaginian Anglo-Saxon imperialists. They divide everything, as I demonstrated before, and even at the moment in which they left, for example, from a colony, they let it, divided in all the possible orders, from the territorial till the political and economic, counting for this task, of course, with their cohorts of sepoys. Remember that the famous international division of the work, is a concept of the English liberalism of the 19th century. Now, you can see that, it is inspired in the Talmudic principles. The king, if he is wise, must divide the bases to reign. The king is the only whole, to whom none of the parts can reach. The parts of the kingdom, worthwhile or useful. Naturally, this kingdom is Malkut, the 10th Zephyret.